The Galactic Survival Academy sat in high orbit above Zenthar Prime, a gleaming monument to the kind of hubris that comes from never having to forage for your own dinner. For 3,000 years it had been producing the finest emergency response specialists, wilderness coordinators, and survival theorists the known galaxy had to offer. Theorists being the operative word here, because when you've spent the last millennium having your food synthesized by machines that could probably pass a medical degree, the actual business of not starving to death becomes rather abstract. The Academy prided itself on teaching survival skills to the children of species who had long since forgotten what dirt tasted like. These were civilizations that had conquered faster-than-light travel, mastered quantum computing, and figured out how to make coffee that actually tasted good at 3 in the morning. But ask them to start a fire without a plasma torch. Well, that's why the Academy existed. This particular rotation included 200 cadets from 47 different species, all of whom had aced their theoretical examinations with flying colors. They could recite the nutritional content of 7,000 edible plants across 900 worlds. They knew the boiling point of water at every conceivable atmospheric pressure. They could calculate the trajectory needed to spear a fish while accounting for light refraction, wind resistance, and the curvature of the planet they were standing on. Absolutely magnificent on paper, these students. Which is probably why the instructors kept drinking during faculty meetings. Among this collection of the galaxy's finest theoretical survivors was a human. Not the human in some grandiose sense, just a human. One of those peculiar primates from that odd little blue world that had only joined the galactic community about 70 years ago, still figuring out which fork to use at diplomatic dinners. The human went by the name Marcus Chen, though most of the other cadets just called him the one from Earth, because apparently learning human names was considered an advanced elective. The final examination was beautifully simple in concept and terrifying in execution. The Academy would drop all 200 cadets onto designation X-47, a moon with breathable atmosphere, abundant wildlife, edible vegetation, and absolutely no technology more advanced than whatever you could make with your own appendages. You had 72 hours to not die. Teams were randomly assigned, equipment was confiscated, and may the odds be ever in your favor, except nobody said that because copyright law apparently survived the transition to galactic civilization. The dropships descended through X-47's atmosphere like metal rain, depositing clusters of cadets across a temperate zone that resembled what Earthfolk might call nice camping weather and what everyone else called suboptimal environmental conditions. Marcus found himself grouped with 5 other cadets, a collection of species that looked like evolution had been playing with particularly creative building blocks. There was Zrel, a Cortaxi whose species had evolved from ambush predators but had spent the last 2,000 years eating nutrient paste while designing starship engines. His 6 limbs and compound eyes should have made him an excellent hunter, should being the critical word in that sentence. Beside him stood Veltara, a cystine whose crystalline body could process 17 different spectrums of light, and who could probably tell you the molecular composition of every leaf in the forest. Catching dinner, however, required different skills than spectral analysis. The Threen twins, Kip and Zap, possessed a hive-mind connection that let them coordinate perfectly and had evolved from pack hunters who used to run down prey across vast plains. Unfortunately, their civilization had discovered food synthesizers roughly 3,000 years ago, and evolution doesn't work that fast. Finally, there was Orm, a glacian whose species came from a frozen world where they'd learned to survive by being incredibly patient and incredibly efficient, which was excellent for their traditional method of hunting, waiting by breathing holes for 6 hours until something surfaced, but less useful when you were hungry now and didn't have 6 hours. The first 4 hours played out exactly as the instructors had predicted, which is to say, like a comedy written by someone with a particularly cruel sense of humor. Zrel attempted to hunt using the stalking techniques his species had supposedly evolved with, which mostly involved him rustling loudly through underbrush, while the local wildlife heard him coming from approximately half a mile away and made themselves scarce. His compound eyes, so excellent at detecting movement, kept distracting him with everything that moved, which on a living moon was essentially everything. Veltara tried a more scientific approach, identifying which creatures were edible, calculating their movement patterns, and setting up what she called probability intercept zones. The local fauna, blissfully unaware they were supposed to walk into probability intercept zones, continued doing whatever they wanted. The Threen twins coordinated a pursuit of what looked like a six-legged rabbit analog, their hive mind working in perfect synchronization to herd it toward a clearing. Their execution was flawless. Their stamina, after 3,000 years of not running after anything faster than a snack cart, was not. The rabbit thing disappeared over a hill while both twins collapsed gasping. Orm found a stream and settled down to wait, employing the patience his species was famous for. This would have been an excellent strategy had there been anything in the stream worth waiting for, but the local equivalent of fish apparently didn't use this particular waterway, making his patience entirely theoretical. By hour 6, tensions were rising along with hunger levels. The cadets gathered in their clearing, exhausted and empty-handed, beginning to eye each other with the kind of suspicion that suggested maybe someone was considering whether their companions were technically edible. "This is ridiculous," Zerl clicked, his mandibles expressing frustration in ways universal translators struggled to convey. "We have studied 73 techniques for procuring protein in wilderness conditions. How is this not working?" Because Veltara chimed with the particular frequency that indicated annoyance. Knowing how to do something and actually doing it are apparently not the same thing. A revelation I'm sure our instructors find hilarious. Throughout this entire performance, Marcus had been quiet. While the others had been demonstrating the difference between theoretical and practical knowledge, he'd been walking the perimeter of their area, occasionally picking up rocks, examining them, and tucking some into his pockets. He'd collected a pile of dry grass, some particularly straight sticks, and what looked like shredded bark. To the alien cadets, it appeared the human was having some kind of nervous breakdown and hoarding random debris. "What is the Terran doing?" Kip asked Zap through their connection, though they both spoke aloud for the other's benefit. "Perhaps humans collect objects when stressed." Zap theorized, "We should review the psychological profiles." Marcus ignored them, too busy examining a piece of rock he'd found. It was flint, or something so close to flint that the difference didn't matter. He'd also found a chunk of what looked like iron pyrite. Both sitting on an alien moon, waiting for someone who actually remembered how to use them. The other cadets watched with confusion as Marcus arranged his collected materials. Dry grass in a small nest, the bark shredded fine. Some tiny twigs, then progressively larger ones. The kind of structure that would make perfect sense to a Cub Scout and looked like absolute madness to species who'd been using fusion reactors since before humans discovered agriculture. Then Marcus struck the flint against the pyrite. Sparks flew. Literal sparks, cascading into the tinder like tiny orange stars. The alien cadets stopped their arguing and stared. Veltara's crystalline form shifted through several colors that indicated confusion. Zerl's compound eyes focused entirely on the human's hands, all other movement forgotten. Marcus struck again. More sparks. The tinder started smoking. "What is he doing?" Orm asked, breaking his patient silence. I think, Veltara said slowly, her voice shifting to frequencies that suggested uncertainty. He's making fire with rocks. That's not possible, Zuril stated. Fire requires a heat source of at least. The tinder burst into flame. Marcus gently blew on it, feeding oxygen to the infant fire, coaxing it larger. He added the small twigs, then bigger ones, building the fire with the kind of casual competence that comes from actually doing something rather than just reading about it. Within minutes, a proper fire crackled in their clearing, the first fire any of them had seen made without technology. The alien cadets gathered around it like it was a religious artifact, which in a way it was. Fire was the technology that had started everything, the great equalizer, the first real tool that separated intelligent species from everything else. And they'd all forgotten how to make it. How did you do that? Veltara asked, her crystalline structure refracting the firelight into rainbow patterns. Flint and pyrite, Marcus explained, holding up the rocks. Strike them together, you get sparks. Sparks land in good tinder, you get fire. Humans have been doing this for about 400,000 years, give or take. But you have technology now, Kip said. Why would you still know this? Marcus shrugged. Camping, scouting, survival hobbyists. Some things are fun to know even when you don't need them. Plus, Earth's only had reliable technology for what, 200 years. We've got a lot of institutional memory of doing things the hard way. While the others processed this information, Marcus was already moving on. He took one of the straight sticks he'd collected and began sharpening it against a rock, creating a point, then another. Then he pulled some fibrous plant material from his pocket and began twisting it into cordage with his fingers. Now what's he doing? Orm asked. Making tools, I think, Zuril answered, watching with fascination as Marcus worked. Within the hour, Marcus had created several pointed spears and something that looked like a primitive snare. He explained the principles as he worked, his tone casual, like he was discussing the weather rather than skills that could mean the difference between eating and starving. You want to set snares on game trails. Animals are creatures of habit, they use the same paths. See here, where the vegetation is pressed down, that's a trail. You set your snare at about this height, disguise it a bit, and wait. He demonstrated, setting 3 snares along different trails he'd identified. The alien cadets watched, like students witnessing their professor split an atom with a rock. The spears are for fishing. Marcus continued. There's a stream over there, and I saw something moving in it. Can't tell if it's actually fish or just something fish-like, but either way, the principle is the same. You account for refraction, you wait until you see one, and you strike fast. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned with 2 fish analogues, both cleanly speared. An hour after that, one of his snares had caught something that looked like a cross between a chicken and a lizard. The alien cadets, who had spent the entire day failing to catch anything, stared at the sudden abundance of food like it was a miracle. Marcus cleaned the creatures with a sharp rock, improvising a gutting tool that would have made a proper knife weep, but did the job. Then he constructed a spit over the fire and set the food to cook. The smell that rose from the cooking meat did something primal to the cadets' brains. It didn't matter that they came from species that had evolved on different worlds under different stars. The smell of cooking food over an open fire spoke to something universal, something that existed before any of them had built starships or split atoms. I don't understand, Veltara said quietly, watching the human work. Your species only achieved space travel 70 years ago. You're considered primitive by galactic standards. How are you better at this than we are? Marcus laughed, turning the spit. Because we're primitive. That's exactly why. Most of you guys figured out technology thousands of years ago. You've had comfortable lives for so long that you forgot the basics. Humans, we've got living memory of world wars, famines, and times when knowing how to start a fire with rocks might save your life. We're still close enough to our desperate times that we remember them. The food cooked, filling the clearing with smells that made stomachs rumble across multiple species. When Marcus declared it done and began portioning it out, there was a moment of hesitation. These were species that had eaten synthesized food for millennia, where every meal was perfectly balanced, perfectly safe, and perfectly boring. Zarel was the first to try it, his mandibles tearing into the meat. His compound eyes widened, and he made a sound that the translator struggled with before settling on something between a sigh and a chirp. "This is," he started, then paused, searching for words. "This is incredible." The others followed. Veltara's crystalline body actually glowed brighter as she consumed the food, her species equivalent of pleasure. The three twins synchronized their chewing, their hive mind apparently deciding this was the best meal they'd ever experienced. Even Orm, patient and reserved, made sounds that suggested his frozen world stoicism had just met something worth getting excited about. "It's the fire," Marcus explained between bites of his own portion. "Cooking changes the molecular structure, makes nutrients more bioavailable, breaks down tough proteins. Plus, it actually tastes good. Our ancestors figured this out before we figured out language." As they ate, the dynamic shifted. The alien cadets began asking questions, real questions, about survival techniques they'd only ever studied in books. Marcus answered, sharing knowledge that seemed basic to him but revolutionary to them. "On Earth, we have these things called Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Organizations that teach kids this stuff. Fire starting, shelter building, tracking, foraging. We learn it before we're adults, just in case." "Just in case of what?" Kip asked. "Your civilization is stable now, isn't it?" Marcus smiled. "Sure, but our grandparents remember times when it wasn't, and their grandparents definitely do. We're only a few generations removed from real hardship. That kind of knowledge doesn't disappear overnight. Some of us even think it's important to keep it alive." In the trees above them, small drones hovered, recording everything. Back at the academy, instructors watched feeds from all 200 cadets. Most groups were struggling, arguing, desperately trying to remember which berries were edible and which would make them regret their life choices. But this group, the one with the human, had a fire, full bellies, and were bonding over a meal that none of them would forget. "Look at that," one instructor said, a Cortaxi elder whose compound eyes had seen 70 years of cadets pass through. "The primitive shows the advanced how to survive." "Perhaps," another instructor mused, a Sistine who'd been teaching for decades, "we should reconsider what we mean by primitive." The night on X-47 grew cold, as nights on temperate moons tend to do. While other groups shivered and tried to remember the theoretical principles of shelter construction, Marcus's group sat around their fire, warm and fed, listening to the human tell stories about Earth's history. "We almost destroyed ourselves about a dozen times," Marcus said, poking the fire with a stick. "Nuclear weapons, climate change, pandemics, pick your apocalypse. But we survived because some people refused to forget how to do things the old way. When the power goes out, when the machines stop working, someone's got to know how to make fire with rocks." Giarol clicked thoughtfully. "We lost that, all of us did. We became so dependent on our technology that we forgot we're still biological creatures who need food, water, and warmth. Your species conquered the stars, Marcus pointed out. That's not nothing. No, Veltara chimed in. Her tone shifted to something that might have been humility. But we did it by standing on the shoulders of our ancestors who knew how to survive. Then we forgot to honor them by remembering their skills. The 72 hours concluded with most cadets exhausted, hungry, and significantly humbler than when they'd started. Marcus's group emerged well-fed, rested, and carrying knowledge they'd actually earned rather than memorized. The final assessment was conducted in the Academy's Grand Hall, where instructors provided feedback to the assembled cadets. When they reached Marcus's group, the head instructor, a dignified Glacian who'd survived more wilderness planets than most species had colonized, stood before them. Your group, she said slowly, was the only one that not only met basic survival requirements but thrived. Care to explain how? Zrel spoke first. We had someone who remembered that intelligence isn't just about knowing things, it's about being able to do them. We had someone, Veltara added, from a species that hasn't forgotten what desperation feels like. Marcus just shrugged. I made fire with rocks and caught some food. It's not exactly splitting atoms. The instructor's expression, as much as Glacian faces expressed anything, might have been a smile. No, Cadet Chen, it's better than splitting atoms. It's the foundation that makes splitting atoms possible. The rest of you would do well to remember that the most advanced technology in the galaxy means nothing if you can't survive long enough to use it. The other cadets, watching from their seats, looked at Marcus with new respect. The human from the primitive world, the one whose species had barely figured out fusion power, had out-survived them all using techniques their ancestors had forgotten. As the assembly dispersed, Marcus overheard two instructors talking. Do you think we should adjust the curriculum? One asked. Absolutely, the other replied. Maybe start with the basics. Fire, shelter, food. The things that kept everyone alive before we got clever. Marcus smiled to himself and headed to the cafeteria. All that survival training had made him hungry, and while he could catch and cook his own food now, the Academy's synthesizers made a really good hamburger, and there was no point being primitive when you didn't have to be. The irony wasn't lost on him that the galaxy's most advanced institution for teaching survival had just learned its most important lesson from a species that still told stories around campfires. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the old ways survive because they work, and being advanced means remembering where you came from, not forgetting it.